How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today's a great day in New Jersey, around 70, 75 degrees. So I figured I would do this episode outside. Great day to discuss corrections. And my guest today is going to be Russ, and we're going to be talking about what to do when inmates refuse their housing assignment. This is not an easy situation. I want people to be aware of that. There is a lot of tips that me and Russ are going to provide today that not only will direct you, but also give you an understanding of why these tips exist. Trust and believe, I've dealt with that a lot of times. Russ has also dealt with this a lot of times. So we may even be able to share some personalized stories, but definitely a good dialogue. I'm sure a lot of us have dealt with inmates who are refusing their housing assignment. But before we go into the show, before we bring in Russ, let me go over our sponsors. First sponsor we have is American Military University. If you guys are looking for a degree, looking to seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They're very supportive of what we do in corrections and also very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. So let's bring some experience back into the classroom, or if you just need a degree to move up, American Military University, check them out, guys. Great online school. We also have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. That book is available on Amazon. That book is doing very well, sells all across the country, in some cases out of the country. So again, thank you guys for the support. This book is used for training. And guys, again, thank you for keeping this book moving forward. This book's been out for a few years now and still, makes its sales. So again, I truly appreciate the support on the creation of this book and helping me keeping the word out there. And then we also have my latest book, How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison. This book is doing very well. Again, very happy. This book is available through Blue 360 Media. The link to that is also in the description. But guys, there's tons of advice in this book. So please get your hands on this book. And then we're going to have another book coming out shortly. It's already in the publishers. And it's going to kind of be a companion to this book, and it's going to be for rookie staff. So, we're putting out a lot of good information out there that will help our trainers and just get good information. It's just great to really be able to look back at your career and, kind of evaluate. I wish I would have knew these things and be able to have a book that kind of gives you some of those things as you're entering this profession or even during this profession. These are books that don't help you as a rookie, don't just help you as a rookie. They also help you as you move forward in your career. Russ, what's up, man?
Good morning, Anthony. How is it going, sir?
Doing good, sir. Thank you for coming on this Saturday morning. Russ, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Not at all. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. And currently I work for a private company, and we do reentry and rehabilitation work for a county jail and for a county probation department. And I am currently sitting here in sunny Las Vegas, Nevada, catching a little break from the humdrum of all of that.
And Russ, how's Keepers of Chaos on Facebook going?
Keepers is going gangbusters, and it's fantastic. Keepers is really the place where, professionals come together. Professionals are able to, seek out knowledge, training, history, and everything else about this great profession. And I think I speak for everyone on Keepers when we really do view this as an absolutely valuable profession. And everyone there is very invested in actually promoting it.
Yeah, it's a very good partnership we have, to be honest with you. We're just sharing our advice and making sure that people in this profession have the knowledge needed to be successful. So again, Russ, the show today is going to be tips on dealing with inmates who refuse their housing assignment. I do believe that this happens often. So, would you agree that this is definitely a good topic? Because it's not the answer, especially in corrections, is never always black and white. So you think this is a good topic for us to be discussing?
Yeah, this is one of those things where, people have to kind of have an idea of what's actually going on. Inmates will tell you one thing when they really mean another. And, sometimes this can actually devolve into a situation that can be not only dangerous, but, if you don't make the right decision, it could be career ending. So this is just, giving up a little game and telling you, hey, you know what, when you start to have a situation like this, pay attention, focus, and see what you can do to resolve it. And it's not always resolvable, but we'll try and give up a little game here.
Yeah, now, guys, even though there's a lot of dynamics in play here when it comes to dealing with inmates that are refusing housing, we're going to try to provide you with some good tips that have a solid foundation to work from. Because, again, each situation may vary in regards to how we respond, but these are just good things to have in the back of your mind when you go to respond. And I'm saying respond, not react. I'm saying respond because we're going to be doing this strategically. And I also want to mention one thing, too. When it comes to refusing housing, remember, guys, there's different types of refusing. We'll get to the reasons why later, but you have those that passively refuse, and you have those that can be aggressive in their refusal. So I guess you got the extreme from passive to aggressive, because you're somewhere in the middle. You may just have active refusals. Aggressive is really someone turning against staff. So you have like passive, where maybe I'm just going to sit down and not move. I'm sorry, I'm not going in. I'm not posing a threat at this point, but and notice I said at this point, but I'm just not going to move. Then you have maybe someone active, where when you do try to get them, they're not attacking you, but they're kind of like, pushing you off, like, come on, I'm not going in, I'm not going in. And then I would say you have an aggressive threat will be the next level, where now when you go to move them, they're not pushing you off. They are literally attacking you, and it's hands-on. Would you agree, Russ, just to understand the type of refusals to housing can go from anywhere from passive to aggressive?
Yeah, and you really don't know exactly, how they're going to couch things. I've been involved in more than I care to, even elaborate on. There's so many times where, I had a guy that, was kind of like tacitly, telling me with body language and with certain phrases that they would have that this isn't going to work out. And it wouldn't give me, anything to really work on. And yet I knew that they were going to refuse with violence in the end. And, every single time that I picked up on certain specific cues, it always ended in violence. And so sometimes it's not even necessarily about, actively stating that they're going to refuse. Sometimes it's the underneath politics that can just sweep them along.
Yeah, and you made a good point. The thing about when it comes to inmates that are passive, or whether they're going to turn out to be aggressive, is you have to always have in the back of your mind that even though they're passive now, they can turn out to be aggressive. But there's a balance. You're not going to go in and respond to that inmate with all guns a-blazing. What you're going to do is to make sure that in the back of your mind, that at any point this passive inmate can easily become aggressive. But I also need to find a way that when I go in there, I'm looking to de-escalate and keep the situation calm. So now this is where you have to try to do your best to control the environment first, before you go ahead and go to address the inmate. So the first thing that I would do first on the radio is I would call for a sergeant and 2 GAs, because I'm going to need their assistance. And mind you, when the sergeant and 2 GAs are coming into my unit, they're not coming in guns a-blazing. This is not a code. This is, I'm just going to look for some extra resources before we go ahead and approach the inmate. But while they're coming, I'm looking to secure the environment. I'm looking to secure the housing area, only because I don't know what's going to happen when we go to address this inmate. And I need to be able to do my best to control the environment and make sure that I'm able to keep my focus on what my objective is going to be, which is now to deal with this inmate and either find out what's happening in regards to their housing and whether I can get them to comply or not. But what's your thoughts on this, Russ, this part?
Yeah, if you have the ability to do that, to get inmates locked down or out of a certain area, and to put that particular individual that we believe is maybe going to be a problem into a position where he's isolated from everyone else, and that we have enough staff to do what we need to do if he becomes violent. That's always the best way to go about it. Sometimes we have enough warning to do that. Sometimes we don't have enough warning to do that, but every little bit of advantage that you can get, you should be taking.
Right, and I wanna bring up something. The reason why you're calling your area supervisor and your GAs is because these are resources. These are resources that you have in play, because at any moment this could go sideways. So you know what I'm going to do? Instead of me waiting for it to go sideways, let me make sure that I have all my tools in place, just in case this happens. I know a lot of people may think, yeah, they're going to go right up to the inmate. I know Russ. Russ is not going to be foolish, but we don't know at this point why Russ doesn't want to go into his cell. So again, we haven't found out what's happening. So you may think you know Russ, but situations can change people. So you need to make sure that you have all your resources in play, just in case Russ is not acting like himself. So Russ, I mean, do you think it is a good thing to, before you go to secure the housing unit, and definitely before you go to address the inmate, that you call for a supervisor and 2 GAs just for some assistance in case it goes sideways?
Yeah, you always want those people in place, because once you already know that someone has kind of put you on notice, whether it's through directly saying, hey, I'm not gonna house here, or whether they're acting in a manner that just doesn't seem right. Always put those extra resources out there, because it can't hurt, and it might actually save the day. So this is one of those things where, hey, just being a good, competent corrections professional that knows and understands what's going down, really paves the way, hopefully, for a successful transition to this housing unit, or a successful transition to taking them out and putting them in either protective custody or some type of more restricted housing.
Yeah. Now, guys, by the way, all because the guy's refusing housing, as long as there's not aggressive or negative behavior, we're not going right for the charge just yet. We got to find out what's happening. I mean, there could be a higher level concern. So that's why it's very important when the sergeants and the GAs are briefed as to, hey, this is what I got going on. As of now, he's not aggressive. He's just refusing housing. And then maybe with the sergeant, yourself, and the 2 GAs, you can have a good approach to try to figure out what the issue is, as opposed to the sergeant, the GA just coming in and then just slapping handcuffs on the individual and trying to drag him out, when that may not be necessary at this point. We could have a legit concern. I know some people who I've read in the comments, some people have actually said, yeah, the moment they refuse, they don't even care about the motive. All they do is they get support, they slap the handcuffs on the individual, and they start bringing them down to the holding area for possible charges. I still, in my mind, I know they refused, and yes, that could be some type of disrespect to a direct order. But having said that, I need to understand the why, because maybe there is a legit reason why he's not going back into his cell. And at this point here, I'm at that point, and Russ will talk about it in a little bit. I need to interview and investigate what the reasons are. So, Russ, at this point, you're not going gung-ho, coming in and putting handcuffs on this inmate because they refused and we don't know why, right? As long as they're not acting crazy, I mean, this gives us a chance to figure out what the issue is and try to resolve it without doing the charge, correct?
Yeah, the thing is that inmates, if they've been transferred, whether it's from a jail, to your facility, or transferred from another prison to your facility, sometimes they're not necessarily really up on what the internal politics are. Sometimes they could have got bad information, and so we always want a chance to sit them down, interview them, see what they think is going on, and then try and get their idea about, why they don't want to house. The one thing that we usually, jump to a conclusion about is, the fact that they might feel that they're in danger from some other group or a specific inmate. That's not always the case. There's a number of different reasons why they might feel that they need to refuse that housing. And sometimes we can do things that alleviate that. Sometimes we can't.
Yeah, obviously there could be some inmates that are individually celled. They're by themselves, and obviously they could have their reasonings. But I know, like, when you have an inmate who has a cellmate, Sometimes, yes, you could have safety issues where they don't want to go back because maybe something happens when they're in that cell alone with that individual. Maybe the individual that they're with is like a predator. Maybe they assault them. They could, whether it's physical, sexual, or sometimes what happens is they could be housed with, let's say, a child molester, and the people that are their boys, like the other gang members, maybe they're associated with a gang, may say, hey, you can't be housed with him. You better do something. And this person may not want to get in any trouble. So he may come up and say, listen, I can't house with this guy because if I house with this guy and I don't take him out, I'm going to get taken out. So there's a lot of reasons as to why you may not want to put this person directly in that cell. But I do want to mention one thing, though. When they do try to pose like an ultimatum, like if I went to Russ and I said, hey, I'm going to tell you something, Russ, if he's my officer, if you house me with this guy right here, I'm going to hurt him or I'm going to kill him. I'm charging him. There's no if and buts about it. You're going charge, you're going to lock, and that may not even have nothing to do with the refusal of the housing. It is literally out there because you chose to do a threat against your cellmate. I mean, there's other ways we could handle it. But having said that, the moment you pose a threat or you say a threat, the last thing I'm going to be doing as an officer is be held liable if you act on that threat, because I hate when they try to force a move and say, well, if you don't move me, I'm going to hurt such and such. Okay, well, now you're being charged. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
Excuse me? Yeah, now you're being charged. You're not going to put that shit on me. So having said that, I got you refused the housing, but you're being charged today. Not so much for the refusing of a housing, but in the context, you're going to be charged with a threat because you just made a threat on the cellmate. I'm sure you've seen that, Russ, right?
Oh yeah, although I have lots of different times that happened. I'll never forget one particular time we had a guy come from another prison, and he was brought onto the yard. And as he was brought onto the yard, he had said something to one of my officers, and so I told the officer to escort him to my office. And I took him outside, and he could see the yard. And I said, "What is the problem here? Why is it that you can't house him?" He says, "I just can't here." And he would never actually say. And so I said, well, I said, you're going to get housed then. You're not giving me anything to go on. I said, your file's already been, reviewed by classification. And that's another big one. Sometimes we have to pick up the fumbled ball from classification. But this guy said, okay, what if I walk right over there and hit that guy? And I said, okay, that's the magic phrase now. And then, I told him, hey, put your hands behind your back. And then, from that point right there, then we were fighting. So you have to, be ready for those things, because when the transition happens, it'll happen, from talking really nice to a sudden violent encounter very, very quickly. So you want all of your resources in place. And I had officers, right there ready to go. I already knew that there was probably a 95% chance that this was going to go bad. And so it was, no harm, no foul. And later on, he actually ended up programming on that yard. But he was a problem for quite a while, for a couple of months after that, even in ADSEG.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, once they say that, it's definitely the extreme side that you cannot negotiate down at that point. It's like, okay, I was going to work with you on your housing, but once you said that, and usually sometimes they say it also just an effort to get control of where they're housing, because they know at that point you have to move them. So here we are, I may be working with Russ to see what's going on, and all they have to say is, okay, well, you know what, Gangi, all Russ has to say is, well, you know what, I'm going to go hurt this person, and now that negotiation is pretty much, it's done. I'm not going to house, or I'm not going to put Russ in a position where he can be hurt or cause pain or cause someone to get hurt. I also want to mention something else. Sometimes you may have an inmate that's not a problem, and they could be an inmate that could be a weaker inmate, an inmate that does get picked on, or could be getting picked on by a cellmate, or could be getting picked on just in the unit in general for what he's done. And then what happens here is they're just tired of getting picked on. So they come up to you one day and they say, hey, listen, I'm refusing to house in this area. I'm refusing to house in this cell. And then, you're trying to negotiate with this person. And all of a sudden, this weaker inmate starts attacking you, the staff member, because to them, it's safer to attack you and go to lock than remain in the unit. you become what they kind of like their tool to get in a lock, so they no longer have to be in that unit. That's why I always tell people to be very careful of dealing with those passive inmates, especially Joe, who's never been a problem before, because once the pressure of, I'm being threatened or I'm going to get assaulted if I go back into my cell, whatever it is, this person is going to refuse housing, but they don't want to be seen as weak. They're not going to say outright, I'm refusing housing because my cellmate's going to kick my ass. I mean, some may, but for the most part, most don't. And what they do is when you go to address the issue, they attack you because they know it's safe for me to attack the officer because they got rules and how they have to respond. And then I can go to lock for longer term. And then I won't have to worry about going back to this unit or back to this cell dealing with this person who's the real threat. And I know you've seen that, right, Russ? Officers that have been used as scapegoats or staff that's been used as scapegoats so inmates can kind of go back and forth in lock. So they kind of like their way of choosing how they're housed.
Yeah, they want to do the thing that's the safest for them. And so, if they go out there and they decide that they're going to push the issue with another inmate, even necessarily one that may look weak or may not look like, that they can win the fight. That inmate at that point probably doesn't really have any guarantee as to whether or not there's going to be 50 other guys come to that one inmate's defense. So, really kind of the safe bet is to do something with staff because they know, hey, once you get those bracelets on them, then it's over, and they're not going to end up with, some, long-term injury, most likely. But that's not a guarantee either. And just because you think that this inmate is only going to fight you a little bit, don't think that either, because we don't know what's in the hearts and minds of inmate. You get to the idea where you could get what's going to happen in a violent encounter, you're being complacent. So you always go, 100% when that thing starts. But just because you think that this inmate is only acting out or acting up or acting as it were, don't believe that for a second. This could go to an actual attempt to kill you for all you know. So be careful in trying to play that politics game where you think that the politics are going to dictate the outcome, because that's not necessarily so.
Yeah, and guys, I want to mention something just to compliment what Russ just said. I agree with that. You may have some who actually before they'll refuse the house and the officer goes to address them and they may say, hey, man, I just need out of this unit. And they just pop the officer once, put their hands up, and they pretty much did what they had to do, they think, in order to get out of the unit. But I've also seen inmates who maybe get assaulted left and right in their cell, and they have all this pent-up anger, and they wind up literally, going to the officer, and then when they go to pop them up once to get out of the unit, they wind up taking out, everything, from whatever's been happening in the last couple of months or whatever it is, and that officer and that inmate wind up battling it out because it turned out that it wasn't personal, but, once this inmate was able to release, he couldn't control what was coming out. And I've seen that because I've seen inmates who literally, I know it sounds crazy, but on the extreme of it all, they're wrong. Don't get me wrong. But I've seen them actually feel a level of guilt for what they've done if it went beyond what it was supposed to be. So like, let's say, Russ was in a fear of his unit. He popped me once, puts his hands up, and then, we toss him into the hole. That's one thing. But then you can have it where Russ kind of went too far because he was pent up with emotion. And next thing you know, they're coming back and say, listen, man, that wasn't supposed to be that way. I just need to get off that unit. And I don't know what the hell came over me. Either way, man, it still presents a very dangerous situation for the staff who thinks that they could just go over there, think they know Russ, and that, without taking into account how much the situation is affecting Russ, and they think I can have this dialogue as if I'm always dealing with consistent Russ. In corrections, there's really nothing consistent, man. And when you go to talk to Russ thinking Russ, Russ got a lot of things happening right now all at once, and Russ is this close to snapping, and you happen to get there right at that moment where the fuse is lit. And to me, that kind of crosses into this. Understand how a simple refusal can easily become it's supposed to be a dangerous situation. And Russ, you shared a couple of stories with that, right? Where you got an officer who believes that, what, I know Russ, I got a good rapport with Russ. Let me, not secure the unit, blah, blah, blah. This is just Russ being foolish. Let me go ahead and talk to Russ. So now you talk to Russ. You haven't notified your supervisor or any type of resources. The unit is still, active. And all of a sudden, the Russ you thought you knew is no longer that Russ. I mean, is there a level of comfortability that could affect good judgment there, Russ?
Yeah, there's different local politics a lot of times that, can play into these things. I'll never forget, we had a series of conditions over a period of years where we would have these inmates come on these particular yards. And, we would go down there and say, okay, hey, are you ready to go? Everything good? And these inmates, they would 100% of the time, they were ready to go house, And I found out that, that if I would ask them, I would say things like, okay, so you can program on this yard. And they would tell me things like, yes, I can program anywhere. Or actually, they wouldn't say yes. They would say, I can program anywhere. And they would leave the yes out of it. And so what I found with 100% certainty beyond this is that the instant that I took them to that yard, there was going to be a violent event that involved them rushing out there and, attacking someone willy-nilly. And this happened so many times that, I would pick up on just a little bit of language or something like that. And so I would press them, I would say, so you can program on this yard. And they would just keep repeating that. I can program anywhere. And so it got to the point where I was able to pick out guys who were going to actually do this. And before anything ever even happened, we would send them back over to, not back over, but we would send them to ADSEG. And then we would look at their file again in the light of, what I had put on them. And then we would, try and find a classification answer to finding a place that they could be sent to. Eventually, some people got tired of that and just said, well, we're just going to bring them on the yard anyway. And so we went back to bringing them on the yard, and we would just have, in the course of a week, 1, 2, 3, 5 different events, depending on the number of inmates that were acting like this. And it was one particular STG group, and it just became where you have to be cognizant of what it is that you're asking the inmate, how they're reacting to it, what the local politics are, and understanding that, it's not always an open rejection of the housing. Sometimes it can be very tacit. And so these guys, time after time, would attack another inmate. A few times they attacked me. And just always be wary that, when we're in that crisis and the emotion gets high inside them, you may not recognize it, that there's about to be a bit of violence. And so when the issue already is maybe something like housing, maybe they've been very open. They say, well, I just can't house here. And then you tell them, well, tell me why. And then they say, just, I can't. And then you decide, or your sergeant tells you, hey, go ahead and put them in. There's a good chance that you're going to be attacked right then and there, or there's a good chance that they're immediately going to take flight on someone else. So this is the part where we have to kind of slow that process down, get back to try and figure out what's really going on here. And don't just get so fed up that we just try and rush the issue along. We want to be really careful about that, because if an inmate has told you that he can't house there, but he hasn't made a threat yet, and you go ahead and put him in without some clarification from a little bit higher up the chain, that's going to eventually, if not on that situation, eventually it is going to be a problem for you potentially.
Yeah, I want to talk real quick before we go about some of the reasons they could refuse housing, and basically some situations where it may make sense or it may not. And then you got to kind of make some judgment call, because again, this is really not a black and white situation. There's so many variables in play. So even when we do this, it's never going to be all inclusive. But most of the times, like a big thing when it comes to refusing the efforts that they may do is, especially if they just don't want to be housed. They don't even in this area, and they don't care where they go. So maybe the threat is so severe, or whatever it is, that they just don't want to be in this unit or in that cell with this individual, whatever it is. Usually I find themselves going to some level of threat, However, surface, it's gonna be out there. If you put me in with Russ, I'm gonna hurt him. Or if you keep me in this unit longer, I'm going to go after the officer. I mean, usually it's very quick because they know that those words are automatically going to get that person moved off that unit. Now, sometimes they try to play a game where they don't really want to go to lock, but they don't want to be where they're at. So sometimes they may do something a little bit subtle where they try to shift the liability of their actions over to the officer or the facility by saying something like, if you put me with that cellmate, I don't know what's going to happen. And then it's like, well, what do you mean that? That's a threat. Well, no, it's not a threat. I could be calling my lawyer. It doesn't matter. It's a threat to me. You're getting charged. Because sometimes they may not be so willing to want to go to lock and get the hell out. Maybe it's not so much about a threat. They could be looking to manipulate housing, and that's where it becomes a little bit more tentative because they think that they can maybe be a little subtle in their concern and then go ahead and not go directly to lock, but maybe get a shift. It doesn't work that way. You know, the moment you feel that the person feels like that they're manipulating the housing, you got to take that level of control back. And again, if they say, well, Russ, Officer Russ, if you put me there, I don't know what I'm going to do to my cellmate. Well, because now you don't know, you're getting written up for a threat. Excuse me, Russ? Officer Hamilton, whatever it is, excuse me? I try to tell you that I'm having concerns with my cellmate. No. You try to push what could have been a threat, and then God forbid if something did happen and I put you back with that cellmate, you're going to say that you spoke to me and that blah, 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 and then you're going to try to hold the facility responsible for your actions. So having said that, I'm not going to take that responsibility, so I'm writing you as a threat, and then you can let the disciplinary hearing sergeant or whoever is the hearing officer hear your case. What's your thoughts on that, Russ? I'm sure you've witnessed that, correct?
Yeah, they try and be, sometimes they try and be, as vague as they can be in order to do that, and there's a lot of different things, they could have a potential enemy situation from the streets. They could have political concerns with regards to the STGs. It might be even weirder than that. They might want to, go be with a friend of theirs that's in a different unit, and things like that. So, never underestimate what it is that they're trying to do, because they could be manipulating it for a reason that's kind of, benign. But then again, it might be more along the lines of, hey, they were sent to this particular prison on a mission and they're supposed to get somewhere else in order to carry out that mission. And it could be, it could be a murder. It could be anything. So just, keep your eyes wide open. And, when these things happen, hopefully we can, at the very least, get some kind of referral back to classification, taking a look at the whole scenario again, because, these things do present a real threat to staff. They can get out of hand in a hurry.
Yeah, guys, sometimes also when you're talking to the inmate on their own and they kind of tell you that maybe there is a refusal based on their safety, you still may want to go ahead with their charge instead of just moving them, because it may help them save face. And then you can introduce them back to another area of the facility instead of just switching them over. Because believe it or not, even though I may not feel safe, not everything warrants PC. Usually what warrants PC is specifics, because you have to be very careful who you put into PC. Because if I lie in generality and say everybody's coming at me and you put me in PC, it could just be a way for me to get to somebody at PC. So PC has to have a very protective measure before you are allowed in. So you need specifics. So sometimes we could be a little bit jailing in our tactics, where if I feel that Russ safety could be at risk, but it's not really specific enough. It's just, maybe there's something, but I don't know if I want to put him in PC because, I have other PC inmates that he could possibly interact with. So what I'm going to do is I may do a little charge, put Russ away for a little bit, and then from there, he could get released when he's done with his little time for refusal into another area. So it doesn't look like Russ gave up anything. It just looks like Russ went through the process and then eventually got released back through after doing his time to another area of the facility. So it's not like Russ didn't want to go to A and, he has problems, I move him right to B. No, Russ went from A, got charged, did his time, and then after they reviewed it, they sent him to B. So it's kind of less direct. And, again, outside of threats against themselves, threats towards others, manipulating is very big. I've seen some inmates say that they don't want to be in this unit because they don't get along with officer such and such. And sometimes they'll say that because either officer such and such is doing, could be doing their job, and they just want out because they want a little comfortability. Believe it or not, there should be never keep separate between staff and inmates unless there's a safety concern. And if there's a safety concern, you remove the threats if possible and let staff be made aware of what's happening and see if they agree that they're comfortable going back to work. But you never inconvenience the staff member unless you have to. So if Russ made a threat against me and I was the officer, I'm not the one that gets moved. Russ gets moved, and then they'll talk to me to ask me if it's okay for me to go back on the unit and in the process do an investigation to see if there's any greater threat. But, sometimes, as I said, they may say have a problem with an officer and try to use that to manipulate a move. And as a supervisor, you really got to look into that because there's two concerns here, and I'd love to get Russ's opinions on this. One is the inmate, you may have a good officer who requires that type of vigilance, and they could just be playing a game, but you also have a concern that if there is a problem, it can elevate, and the officer could be at risk. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's difficult. Everything that we do in corrections, has elements of conflict in it, and conflict between staff and the inmates. We always have to bring that to the highest level of our attention to try and figure out exactly what's going on. And you should always be trying to do what you can to mitigate what all of those risks are. A lot of inmates, they do have conflict with staff because those staff members are being diligent. They're enforcing the rules. And those inmates that have a particular problem with following those rules are the ones that are always going to be, more in conflict with that officer. And so sometimes, it can be a way of them, signaling that, hey, they are not willing to deal with this individual. And it happens all the time. But that doesn't mean that we can just ignore it and just say, well, this is just the way things are. We should be constantly working at, gnawing at that thing and making things better. None of these things that we've talked about are easy to deal with. There's a lot of nuance. Sometimes there's a lot of complexity in all of these things. And, but one of the things that you as a corrections professional need to do is be able to identify all of these different complexities. And sometimes it's your job to come up with a solution, and sometimes it's not. A lot of the times, they would tell me, okay, find the solution for this. And I would tell them, there is no solution. This individual is going to commit a violent act. And then they would say, okay, well, just be there when he does it, and that put a lot on me in those situations because we didn't have a direct way to charge him because they hadn't said enough yet. And yet time and time again, it would happen and I would be there. And so it's just one of those things that sometimes the only solution is the process, and the process begins with an incident package in some cases.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, safety and security is never convenient. It's intentional. It's always going to be intentional effort. If there is a concern with, let's say, the officer and the inmate, obviously you do your due diligence to kind of see how real this concern may be. But if by chance it is a better bet to move the inmate from the officer, but you do believe that the inmate could be playing some game, that doesn't mean like when I get the inmate to another unit, we're just as vigilant because eventually there'll be a pattern. He'll have a problem with another officer who's doing their job, and you got to look for patterns because it can go on the adverse too. If I got an officer that is just not professional, maybe the first time around you believe the officer, but no matter where you put them, they kind of have that pattern of negative behavior. I think that's what we have to look into. Administration, because we look at things long term, and I also believe our supervisors as well, we look for patterns of behavior before we act impulsively. Yeah, there are some things that are going to force us to move real quick, but there are some things where it's like, okay, you know what, let's move this person here and see if there's a pattern. So we put them next to an officer who's just as vigilant, and then that person comes back and says, yeah, I'm having problems with Officer Gangi. Okay, now we start to see that there's a pattern. we start to see that this person's using this bullshit to go ahead and manipulate themselves out of units where the officers are actually on top of them and doing their job. So again, usually some level of refusing to house is also for people that want to have control and where they are placed, because obviously they could be trying to do something or they just want that level of control. So you may have units that literally do not allow them to get that comfortable. And that's another thing, guys. One last thing before we close is when you know that you have an inmate that's bringing in contraband, and let's say you write them up, and then when the inmate gets released after being charged, they constantly try to go back to the same unit. You got to not allow that to happen, because if they got it there once, they can get it there again. And sometimes they want to go to that unit because they'll be like, well, this is where they mess up. They may say, well, if I'm in this unit, Russ, if I'm in this unit, it's where I'm more comfortable. That's the word we don't like. That's the word we don't like in corrections. If I have an inmate saying they're comfortable, I know a lot of people on the surface will say, okay, if he's comfortable, that means they're probably not going to be problematic there, and there probably going to be no concerns. No, guys, that's not what they mean usually when they say they're comfortable. When they say they're comfortable, that means they're able to operate what they want to operate. So when an inmate first tells me, hey, Gangi, this unit won't work because, I'd rather go to this unit here because that's the unit where I feel that I'm more comfortable, that's the red flag for me. 100% red flag for me. That's the one unit that inmate will never go back to if I have the power to do that, if I'm not transferring them out. And before we close, anything on that, Russ? When an inmate says, hey, can you send me there because that's the unit where I'm more comfortable at, how do you translate comfortable?
I translate that as manipulation, because that's where they're trying to let you know, hey, I'm not going to be a problem there. I'm going to be a problem somewhere else. Yeah. So what is it that we're doing? We're trying to shortchange, a little behavior problem for potentially a problem that exists with a breach of security. And so if someone's like that and, they're getting contraband, they're always the ones that are, dealing a little bit of dope or in weapons or whatever the contraband is, even if it's a minor nature, they're probably also dealing in some more major types of contraband. And so we've just put them into a situation where they're comfortable, able to operate. Maybe the staff there are not as hip as to what's going on. And suddenly this becomes a model inmate, right? Hey, yeah, we don't have problems with him anymore. No, you only think you don't have problems with him anymore. And so our perception at that point becomes meaningless, all right? Because we're not able to judge who's a problem or whatnot. The inmates that have behavioral problems are the ones that we tend to focus on, and they're not always the threat. They're just an inconvenience.
Right. And guys, listen, before we get to closing, one last thing. So patterns really matter, especially if you're the investigative division, but also the officers on the floor. Inmates will say, let's say I want to get to a unit because my boyfriend's there or whatever it is, my girlfriend's there, whatever it is. I'm not going to outright say, put me on this unit because my girlfriend's there or my boyfriend's there. I'm just going to think of a reason where it forces the facility to act like I need to be put on this unit because my medical and I have ADA concerns and whatever it is. They look for ways to get you to think outside of what their initial intent really is that I'm trying to get with my person. So what I would tend to do is, if they want to do that and they get me to a point where, let's say in this specific scenario, they want to be with somebody and they kind of put something out there which makes it tough for me to refuse them, then I do a swap and I swap them with the person I think they want to be with. And then I move that person into another area and move that one to where they got to go. So now that person has to come up with another excuse, and then you start to get the pattern of lies. Hey, you just told me you had to be on this floor because of medical. Now you're here. Why do you want to go downstairs? Oh, I got safety issues. Okay, so now the medical no longer applies? I'm curious, because the more, if they start to trap you where a decision has to be made, and usually you get this also on the administrative level because the complaints can come in from the lawyers and whatnot, before you react, you got to try to understand what that motive is and see if there's a way you could expose it through your actions. I mean, again, I gave you one simple scenario, but there's going to be a lot more. But I guess the generalized discussion is, how do I expose motive? Because they got me where I have to move them now. I have to move this individual, but what are they really trying to get to, and how can I expose that? Because that's what's going to matter later on when you do make decisions and you're able to expose the person's credibility. So basically it was the hospital today, but then yesterday it was something else. And now today it's something else. You can clearly see this has nothing to do with the hospital. This person's just clearly manipulating housing. And that doesn't happen or it doesn't get exposed off the first move. So you got to have vigilance on that, got to understand the patterns, document the patterns, and then expose them. So again, sometimes it may require you to have to do the move. But if you understand, like Russ said before, what the motive is, maybe there's a way you can facilitate the move that does not give the individual what they really want. And then they turn out to expose what it really is. And then now we're not as pressured. But it's a process. I mean, that really is a process. And that's something that's done with all departments. Because I would even actually call medical and say, like my scenario here, does this guy have ADA, blah, blah, blah? No. Okay, so maybe I can lean on medical and say, hey, medical says he has no issues. Maybe I'm not going to move him, and then they'll try another angle. Medical didn't work. So now the next day, I got to go ahead and I have a problem with this officer. And you also know sometimes where it's manipulation. One last thing where the request is specific. I can't be around this unit with Officer Hamilton. You know what? I just got to go to Unit 3. Well, that's random. I got 20 units here. So you don't have you have a problem with this one officer or this one inmate. I have a problem with my cellmate. I got to go to Unit 3. I got a problem with Officer Hamilton. I got to go to Unit 3. Why is it every time you have a problem, you got to go to that one unit? So look for patterns. Look for what's repetitious, and you will expose what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and if that's a team effort. Hey, Russ, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
All of these things and all of these solutions that we're talking about are tough to do because we have more than just that one inmate to deal with. At the institutions that I've generally been at, we've had thousands of inmates. And so follow through becomes difficult. But, if you're working with a good crew and stuff, you can, by documentation, help facilitate a lot of those things along. Because, if it's just it was just me and Anthony on one particular unit and we're trying to deal with one guy, the follow-up can be almost impossible because they just kind of get lost in the weeds because, we're having these mass movements and thousands of people. But you know what? If we start, documenting things and letting, that thing float around in his file and we start, noticing what it is that they're trying to do, or their story just becomes a convenient story day in, day out, then we can start to identify those patterns in a way that allows classification to deal with this individual more effectively. Because sometimes it's very hard, down on that, line level type of thing to make impactful changes. And so sometimes we have to, like, those documents, they're like little flares we shoot up in the air. Hey, you should pay attention to what this guy's doing, because he's being trouble for us. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
No, Russ, it's awesome because basically, are we communicating with each other? That's the key. I mean, the one thing you don't want to have ever in a facility is where the inmates communicate better than we do as staff. I mean, because it's all about traveling, the message being traveled quickly. And if we're not communicating, our message is delayed. If they're communicating, their message moves quicker. So I always think it's good to kind of be ahead. And the only way you can be ahead of any game that's being played is staff communicating. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. As always, the show is teared up. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.